to more bandwidth, they should seriously consider the route of, can that additional money be used to better manage the existing resources, to get better effectiveness from them, and then look at expanding the available connectivity, if you like. And I would, well, I'm not a Vice Chancellor, but if I was, I might be prepared to say that we will have no more expansion of connectivity until it can be proved to be managed effectively and optimised. But then, of course, I would need to resource it effectively as well. The IT department, this shouldn't be seen as just an IT problem. It's a cultural problem, it's an institutional problem. All of the users and their behaviour creating this problem. The available circuit is saturated, it's being used ineffectively, it's being used for non-core research, educational purposes. So it's a community problem, if you like. And the IT people are being asked to solve it. They can't solve it alone. They are going to be essential in this. One of the things is making sure that they're governed, they're resourced properly, making sure their staff are trained and retained. This perennial problem of staff retention at all levels, but in particular in IT, it comes up again. If you then train your network engineers to manage the bandwidth effectively, they will then become highly employable professionals who can and do move readily. So that needs to be accounted for and strategies put in place to address it. But where we can share information on this and approaches on this between institutions and actually look at benchmarking common technical solutions, common policy approaches and share those. Just some of the recommendations for the senior management there. There's not really any rocket science, if you like, in that list. They all make sense. They all need to be done and actually actively done, not just talking about we're going to make it a priority. We actually have to make it a priority. But the last one I think is particularly important. I previously mentioned that there are some areas of extreme excitement, if you like, in the African university community, where they are making very good progress in this, and it's mainly by joining forces, working together. I think we're going to hear a bit about the AVU and the work they're doing in terms of the consortium developments, but also then the opportunities there to work together in the management and optimisation developments. They should be realised, and they are in a number of instances. Okay, finally, just a couple of slides on how INASP in particular, but also some other organisations are helping develop capacity in this area. So we have a programme of management seminars, technical training workshops, training support, information, tools development, if you like, to help build capacity, primarily in African universities and research institutions, but also in organisations in other regions, in Latin America, in Asia. We have funding and, if you like, a remit to work in this area there as well. Some of the things that are available, there's some folders at the back, there's quite a few of them, so please do take one. On bandwidth management optimisation, there's just a few information sheets in there, there's a few, if you like, references to further information, a few guidelines, executive briefing, that kind of thing. So we're trying to promote these to the people who need to sponsor these activities, these changes in behaviour, if you like, targeted at senior institutional managers, ICT professionals, if you like, briefing packs, briefing information. We've run, last month we piloted the policy development workshop for bandwidth management optimisation. We've got a number of workshops planned for next year on national and regional levels and local levels as well in African countries, but also a Latin American one and maybe one in Southeast Asia as well. Network traffic monitoring and analysis workshops, but also software tools to be used there as well. The pilot workshop of that has been run in 2 weeks' time in Zambia, with a number of countries participating, and then that's being rolled out as well we've got funding to support workshops in about 8, 9 countries in Africa, and also some other countries as well. But also the development of some more technical workshops, some more technical tools as well. So next March, we're going to have a open source workshop on open source bandwidth management tools. So there are a number of initiatives that people have been working on, and it's quite surprising. There are a number of initiatives in the same countries. People have adopted slightly different solutions to the same thing. So it's fundamentally the same problem. So we're going to be running a couple of workshops to bring together, if you like, professionals active in this area within the south, but also in the north on a global basis, and to actually exchange best practice, and to hopefully identify if there are any problem areas, any gaps, if you like, in the software tools that are plugging these holes, if you like, in the bandwidth management. Then what we'll do is we'll hopefully develop software tools as well, so we have funding to, if you like, pay for the development to fill those gaps. And some of the areas we're looking at are the network control, network traffic shaping, we mentioned, sort of user profiling, user account system, delay pools, so that you can actually manage your network resources depending on the user and what they're doing, what permissions they've got, that kind of thing. Content caching and filtering. Some of the things we've heard about today about this metadata sharing of information, locally hosted versus regionally hosted versus internationally hosted. That's quite important to optimise the traffic on a circuit depending on who's requesting it and who's supplying it. And then also some standalone training and documentation resources. So there are things like email, bandwidth-friendly email services. I personally think, though I don't have the hard evidence to support this, I personally think that email is probably one of the key, if you like, hogs of this limited bandwidth. If you do an analysis on network traffic and say an average, and that's a difficult thing in itself, but of an average university in this kind of environment, about 75 to 85% of the network traffic will be HTTP. Okay, so it's web-based stuff. If you do an analysis of that, and I don't have the hard figures for it, but I have some sort of hazy figures, you can get up to about 50% of that is basically webmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, these high bandwidth commercial products. So if you can just supply your own network, your own campus provided email service, you can cut down a lot of bandwidth. But even worse, the amount of email going around, about 75% of it is spam. So if you filter out the spam before it goes over the expensive international bandwidth links, then you can actually maybe improve the efficiency of your circuit enormously, maybe by up to about 75%. So that might be something where consortia can get together to provide their mail services, filtering spam, spam processing on a fast connection, maybe in Europe or in the US, and then transfer the, if you like, cleaned email to the full delivery via campus-based webmail systems. I don't have the hard evidence, but I've got some quite convincing sort of greyish evidence on that. But that would make a significant progress in this area. And that's one of the things that we'll be looking at in some of these workshops. Okay, when and where, there's some, the countries listed there where we've got workshops planned, and this is going to be in the next, the first 6 months of next year. We hope to run workshops in all of those countries. The pilot ones are October, they've already been, one of them, there's another one in November, we have another one planned January, February and March, and then we're looking at arranging the other ones afterwards. We'd like to get NRNs, national research networks, consortia of universities, the universities at national level involved, because it makes sense to share the solutions to these problems on national levels or on international levels. So we're looking at getting NRNs involved wherever possible. Some further information, and I would say please do take one of these folders because there's lots of information in there as well. Okay, thank you.
Any questions? stunned them. I would do an energizing session, but as this is the last presentation, I think we can feel ourselves suitably energized to cope without having the standing up and waving of arms. We're going to move then to a presentation on the African Virtual University by the rector, Peter Venezzo, who's joined us in place of his colleague to talk about the AVU Bandwidth Initiative and Access to Information. Peter, you need to switch. Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You can see I'm not calling him someone else. I just arrived a moment ago, so I hope I will be able to stand for the next 10 or 15 minutes. This is just to give you, I think, a small entree, and my apologies for not having been here during the whole day. But most of the issues on bandwidth, I'm sure you probably have heard a lot of them about today. So we'll just give you, I think it's a brief on the AVU and what we're trying to do. We were established in 1997 by the World Bank and to work in sub-Saharan Africa. The main reason, I think, for establishing the AVU was to experiment on how to use ICTs in teaching and learning in African institutions, and to see whether this experiment would work. We are now based in Kenya as an intergovernmental organization, but I think the most important point is that we have a presence in 27 African countries, and we operate 57 learning centers in those African countries. This is where we operate. If you look on the eastern seaboard, Sudan, Ethiopia, Somaliland, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Madagascar, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. It's not shaded. We do have a major project there on teacher education, which has got three components: the teaching and learning of mathematics and science, but also the training of teachers on how to use ICTs across the school curriculum. So it's a major initiative which is posing very serious challenges for us in terms of the usage of ICTs in teaching and learning, especially in teacher education and at the tertiary level as well. The focus of the AVU is that we work with and support our African partners to develop demand-driven, open, distance, and electronic learning programs to increase access to tertiary education and training using what we call our in-country strategy, i.e. that the African institutions themselves, having gained the knowledge, the skills, and the competencies to be able to offer their own programs through open, distance, and e-learning, they should be able, the assumption is to increase access to those demand-driven programs. We support these partners so that at least they're able to deliver their own programs in the most cost-effective and also very flexible way through what we're calling a capacity enhancement program that the AVU has developed. And that capacity enhancement is capacity enhancement in open, distance, and e-learning. So that's what we do. But obviously the challenge of bandwidth has led to the establishment of what we are calling the AVU learning architecture. And I think you've heard a lot about the issues of bandwidth, and we were part and parcel of that study that was mentioned by the two speakers who came before me. The AVU learning architecture that we are putting in place so that our partners can access learning resources, it is intended to develop a program development model, an instructional design model, a pedagogical model, a delivery model, and a technology model. And the reason we've taken this approach is really to answer the issues of what comes first. Is it the content? Is it the technology? Is it the learning resources? So hence the development of a learning architecture. It obviously advocates for learner-centeredness, so that at least learners have access to learning and support, in particular access, especially to information resources. The focus is also just-in-time learning, which takes into account different pedagogical and technological contexts in Africa. I'll say a little bit more on that one. And that learning architecture presupposes flexibility and a blended mode of delivery. It's becoming increasingly difficult to come up with one mode of delivery on the African continent in our African institutions, and hence the primacy now and importance of blended modes of delivery. That is the AVU learning architecture. We've come to this realization because our initial model kind of assumed that the African continent was one country. Someone somewhere forgot that there were 52 countries at different levels of technological development. So the AVU learning architecture is supposed to take into account, on one end, countries where there's a very low level of technological development, i.e. people learning under the tree. And to the other end, a high level technological context. I think you saw what was presented in terms of bandwidth and connectivity on the African continent. And the two countries that kept coming up in sub-Saharan Africa are South Africa and Senegal. But I also do hope that you all note that even in those two countries, there are serious disparities. If you move from Dakar going up to St. Louis, it's like any other African country in terms of access to electricity and in terms of access to the internet. Similarly, even in South Africa, you've got areas that have got low-level technological context and high-level technological context. The whole area of Gauteng will be very different, for instance, from the northern province of South Africa. So we have developed this learning architecture that takes into account face-to-face learning systems and moving to the extreme end where we talk of the virtual classroom, M-learning, distributed educational technologies, and distance education technologies. And then somewhere in the middle, we've got the email, integrated learning systems, and computer-based instructions. We now realize that this kind of learning architecture enables us to move from one African country to the other in terms of putting in place learning systems. And it is being now used fairly extensively in the countries that we operate in. We also have a digital library, and it is a vital academic support service. The benefits, as are well known, remote accessibility provides all learners with current and relevant information resources cheaply. Obviously, the vision is to provide affordable education and affordable learning resources to students and researchers, and that the African institutions, the African academics, and the African students that we work with have an ability to share resources, thus cutting down on costs of duplicating the service in each of the centers. But at the back of all this, the whole issue of bandwidth and connectivity is still there. So the challenge is an attempt to overcome the textbook challenge. As we all know, it is not affordable, and libraries are no longer able to acquire all textbooks that are required by students as far as the support curriculum is concerned. There is still a very heavy dependence on good internet connection, and hence the challenge of providing a digital library to African institutions. And one issue, one alternative that we've now come up with is the alternative of open educational resources. We'll be talking in great deal about this initiative during the next few days here in Tunis. The AVU has developed what we are calling our open educational resources architecture. And all it is concerned with is that On the African continent, I think someone talked about the issue of the brain drain. There are very few people with skills at the moment to develop content in each of our African institutions. And this is why we are now interested, and we've developed this Open Educational Resources Initiative, so that we can create those resources, and we can organize the resources and disseminate the resources, and then work with our partner institutions to utilize those resources. As I'll talk a little bit later on, we are working very closely with MIT, and we've already started a pilot, We've already started a pilot in East Africa, especially in Kenya and in Addis Ababa at the university. And this is something that is beginning to gain interest in the institutions. The Open Educational Resources Architecture, the basis is that we are able to provide very rich content, but which still requires good internet connectivity for effective use. And the challenge, as has been said earlier on, is still the cost and availability of reliable and cheaper bandwidth. But however, the issue of open educational resources is able to address the major challenge that we face on the African continent, which is that of content. Because then people develop these resources right across the continent and are able to share them in a manner that is effective. I think those quotes, you probably heard about them, that the challenge, the average university has no more bandwidth than the quantity of a residential connection in US or Europe, that the average bandwidth reported for the sample is, as was indicated earlier on, and this is coming from the ACTIS report. But I think that's how serious the situation, that the average household in North America has more bandwidth than the average African institution with 30,000 students. In terms of our own situation, in a survey this year, 32% of AVU students have poor internet connectivity, while only 8% have got very good internet connectivity. I think these figures substantiate what I said earlier on. Low bandwidth in African universities contributes to limited use of digital resources. Obviously, there's an argument that other people say the question is not bandwidth availability, but as was said earlier on, the management of that bandwidth. There is a significant lack of bandwidth quality and management, as was said earlier on. So all we are saying is we agree with what was said by the two speakers who came before me. We have put in place what we're calling the AVU VSAT initiative in all our partner institutions, so that at least these institutions are able to access bandwidth on their own. The challenge, and I think this was said in passing, the challenge is the whole issue of the regulation of that environment on the African continent. In countries where it is not regulated, it's very easy for us to put VSATs in the institutions. There are a few countries where we cannot even operate. As I speak to you today, we ordered a VSAT system for one African country, and it is still sitting at customs, and we're told that you just cannot get a license in country X. So the VSAT initiative is seen to be, I think in the short term, as a solution, as opposed to the fiber cables that everybody was talking about. And I'm glad that people are talking in terms of 2 to 8 years, so that we can all begin to access the fiber on the African coast. So VSAT provides, at the moment, a short-term solution to the issue of bandwidth on the African continent. You have heard about the higher education in Africa, the bandwidth consolidation project. The AVU is part and parcel of this. It's 10 institutions, plus the Association of African Universities headquarters in Ghana, plus ChemNet in Kenya. And what we have done is we have managed to significantly bring down the cost of bandwidth for the consortium institutions. And this is because I think we have gone to them with the assistance of the major donors that provided the funding for this project, that we have got these institutions, and this is how much they want to purchase are you prepared to lower the price of that bandwidth? You had a figure of about $5 per kilobit per second. We've managed to bring it to half that price. But as you know, and I think it was said in the charts that were shown by the two speakers, that even that half price is still a lot compared to what an average North American or British institution pays for bandwidth compared to the African institution. So we do hope that as we bring in more partners, we should be able to bring down the cost of the bandwidth that goes into the African institutions. And was said earlier on, the challenge is obviously in the management of the bandwidth that's going to the African institution. Another approach that the AVU has come up with in terms of resources, learning resources for students in our partner institutions, is what Pauline calls the store with approach in addition to bandwidth, which means storing information locally in the institution's local area networks so that they don't have to be online all the time. Bandwidth in this network is free for a limited time, making it a cost-effective and reliable alternative. And what has also happened in this pilot project is that massive devices such as hard disks containing information are plugged into the system, thus facilitating simultaneous sharing at high speed. And the institutions or the learners are not connected, but it's part of a local area network which they can gain access to at high speed. There's a use of meter servers, and this is the MIT Open Courseware project, which we are handling together with the University of Addis Ababa and the University of Nairobi in Kenya. It's basically large-scale, web-based publication of open educational resources from MIT faculties and schools that are going to these institutions. And we are involved in setting up a meter site and conducting sensitization workshops. We now want to roll into the other partner institutions that are part and parcel of our network. For us, the meter servers overcome the need for a lot of bandwidth as the rich digital content is made available locally and students are able to download it at much greater speed. We are also part of what most of you, I'm sure you probably heard about it, the e-Granary Digital Library. This is the WiderNet project at the University of Iowa. It overcomes the problem of bandwidth by delivering digital content to institutions and intranets. It also has a facility for mirroring websites of content providers into 120 to about 250 gigabyte hard drives, which are later plugged into the institution's local area network. So it's something that is taken, it's loaded with information, and plugged into an institution's local area network. And thereby we bypass the whole issue of connectivity and bandwidth and the costs associated with that connectivity. The AVU and the WiderNet are collaborating to deliver the digital library to the majority of our partner institutions. In conclusion, cost is still an issue, apart from issues of content, management of the bandwidth, availability of technology, and the deregulation issues. And I'm just going to show you a map right now. I think as we continue to talk about these issues, the question of whether people in Africa and whether institutions in Africa, especially after assistance from donors has withered away, I think we need to address that. This is a map that we have borrowed from Mason, and it was presented at MIT 2-3 weeks ago. I think if you can look at the average salaries of Africans, whether they are in universities or outside universities, I think what it shows is that this is still a very, very big challenge. So if you look into that little box, the proportion of average salary to the cost of internet connectivity in Europe will be 0.02%. If you look at a country such as Nigeria, it will be 3.5%. So before someone actually says, I want to invest in internet connectivity, the issue of whether people can afford to do that or not becomes the most important issue to consider. So the question of cost, as far as we're concerned, is still critical. And what that map also shows, it shows users per thousand, and you can see what the situation is like on the African continent. That it ranges, I think, from the figures that we have is 1 per thousand to South Africa, which has got 68 per thousand. And I hope that my colleagues from South Africa should also be able to show us once in a while the disparities that exist even in South Africa itself, because that figure is very skewed. And it skews the statistics for Southern Africa as a whole. So for us, the question of internet connectivity and internet costs are closely related if we are to address this particular issue. Those of you who are familiar with the usage of fiber in Senegal in particular will know that even up to this day, fiber in Senegal, in Dakar, is much more expensive than the use of VSATs. And I think this is part and parcel of the problem. Thank you very much.
So, are there any questions for Peter other than I would love that map? In fact, I love your presentation, but I'd certainly love that map. It's a very revealing set of data there. The numbers always talk more than the words. I would throw the floor open, please.
Last week I was at the General Assembly of IFL in Vilnius, and there was Professor Boras of Rice University. I don't know if you know about that project where they've got open access, open source, really high quality courseware. They're trying to develop a library of the best open access, open content training modules. And if people in the region also have relevant modules that they'd like to be converted into open XML and things, they can also work on projects to do that. So I just wondered if you were aware of that and have any interaction with them.
Yes, we are aware of it, and during the course of the next few days, we will be part of presentations from MIT, from Utah, and the Hewlett Foundation, and the Open Invest UK on open educational resources. So there are other initiatives that are taking place on the African continent. And what the AVU is doing with support from the Hewlett Foundation is to put these resources together so that African academics, especially African academics in institutions where there are no human resources in particular fields, should be able to get access to these resources. But it's not just access we're talking about. We're also talking about African academics, African researchers building on this knowledge that we are putting together so that A, they can contextualize it for their own institutions and their own countries and their own environments, but B, so that this knowledge and this information can be made available very freely and at no cost at all to their own students. So yes, this is a major initiative, and even if you go onto our website, we've gotten a lot of support, especially financial support from the Hewlett Foundation, to really begin to roll this out on a much wider scale on the African continent. But we will obviously would want to continue to work with others that are involved in this field, because it seems for us to provide an answer to a problem that African institutions have not gotten onto. You heard one of the speakers talking about the issue of the brain drain. With this initiative, we will be able to reverse that brain drain, because Africans and people of African descent in the diaspora are now beginning to contribute to the area of open educational resources, especially in science and technology. And I'll give details during the course of this week. Thank you.
You stated that you have managed to bring down significantly the cost of the bandwidth. How did you, what is the broad details? Could you just specify the numbers?
I didn't hear the last part of your question.
You stated that you have, this AVU has managed to, this virtual university has managed to bring down substantially the bandwidth cost.
Oh, thank you. I think you heard from the statistics that were given earlier on that the average is about 4 to 5.6 US dollars per kilobit per second in African institutions. But that's for a very few institutions. Even in our network today of the 57 institutions, they're paying $4.6 per kilobit per second per month. But we have managed to talk to a satellite provider, and that's Intelsat, and the price has come down to $2.3 US dollars per kilobit per second per month. 2.3. 2.3 is a lot cheaper than what most Nigerian, Ghanaian, Mozambican institutions were paying for bandwidth. And some of us get a little bit emotional when you talk about this, because we're being cheated by bandwidth providers. If you go to Nigeria, even in one state, they were providing bandwidth to different institutions at different prices. They would give bandwidth to one institution at about $6 per kilobit per second, to another institution, $14 per kilobit per second. So they were literally cheating these institutions. But please don't quote me. So we've really managed to bring it down. And what we hope is that we should get more African institutions. You have heard of the consortiums that are coming up in Southern Africa, in Eastern Africa, and hopefully in West Africa and in North Africa, so that together we can go to these bandwidth providers and say, we know what you are charging in Europe and North America. It is 12 US cents per kilobit per second per month. And we are no longer prepared to pay $2. We want to come to that very same price.
Can I follow up with that actually? I attended a conference in London in February. It was organised by a range of organisations. The conference was called Newcom. And they were looking at the reasons for this apparent very high charging, when in fact, according to the satellite providers, there are more satellites operating over Africa than the capacity can possibly use. Something like 30 active satellites now. It's not a question of the bandwidth in the sky. It's a question of the lack of safety, if you like, for the service providers at country level. Their licenses are often granted for short terms. They're very unreliable business space. They're trying to get all their costs back in a year. The whole business model is if you like, shot. And I think it takes a mixture of regulatory policy change and a stronger institutional business model for these internet service providers, or you're going to get ridiculous charges. They're charging far more than they would need to if they were simply passing on the bandwidth. There's a regulatory issue in there that their licenses are costing far more than they can really afford out of the business models over the short term.
Yeah. You know, I share that, but and let me just give you another piece of information that he gave to give you, the starkness of the statistic. Every square inch of the African soil is covered by satellites. Every square inch of the African soil is covered by satellites. You have often heard, I think you all saw the cover photograph of The Economist, I can't remember what month it was, with an African boy and a cell phone. That in terms of cellular phone penetration, Africa is experiencing the highest rates compared to any other continent at this point in time. I agree with you that it's a question of the business model. But if cellular phone companies are now able to penetrate even the remotest parts of the African continent, what is the issue with the African institution? What is the issue with the African higher education institution? And I think that's a question for me and my colleagues who work on the African continent to answer that question. The issue of the deregulation of the environment is still key. I think the comment I gave earlier on, that if you go to Tanzania today, they've made a deliberate effort to create an enabling environment for their higher education institutions to be able to access visas and to be able to access the bandwidth by dramatically reducing the price, the fee for obtaining a license. I think right now it comes out to about $200 that a Tanzanian investor will pay, as opposed to, say, Ethiopia, where that fee is still almost prohibitive and very few institutions can afford it. So yes, I agree there is the bit that African governments and African countries themselves have got to address, because it has nothing to do with cost. It is a political issue, it is a political decision that they've got to make. So that has got to be addressed. But there's also the business part of it, the business modeling part of it, that we all have to begin to address, so that maybe we can continue to reduce the price of bandwidth for the African institutions. Thank you.
I'm conscious of time. I think it's very neat the way we've circulated through the access at an international level, the trying to promote content mobilization at local level, through to the constraint we all feel, which is the issue of bandwidth and the way that content is exchanged. But I definitely like the focus on content. I think if the WSIS agenda was more focused on content, we might all be a little better off here. But it's a mixture of issues. Have we got any recapping or any points that anyone would like to bring up? Come back to the speakers that have spoken earlier this afternoon, or anyone, any issues that they feel they'd like to just bring out of the day?
When we talk about bandwidth, most of the time we are only talking about the technological bandwidth of the net. There are other things like social aspects of the bandwidth. Where people do not have the net, still they can share knowledge and uplift the people's living standards through other means. So I think probably one should think about such opportunities, especially in terms of rural development. People can use earlier technologies such as the public address system, maybe community newspaper, the local radio programs, and so on. Maybe that should have been figured in some of our discussions. But the topic was so framed that it only concentrated on the net and its bandwidth. That's what I thought.
I think we saw an interesting model here of a continuum from village hub to VSAT connector on one of your earlier slides. We definitely, if I take the FAO thesis on this, we believe that the digital divide is predominantly a rural phenomenon. I was talking to Mike earlier about our inability to get comprehensively verifiable statistics on the rural-urban divide. People talk generally about national statistics of accessibility of ICTs and use of ICTs. Very difficult to get verifiable data that look at the disadvantage of the rural areas. It's not an issue in Europe because the rural population is so relatively small. But when you've got a lot of countries now, and it's interesting, the map that Mike was showing of Africa, it shows the cluster of green dots around the continent's edge. It's effectively showing you by a very pictorial way the sort of in-access problems that you have once you get